It was a late spring afternoon in the city of Florence, where sunlight spilled like molten gold across cobblestone streets, and the scent of blooming wisteria drifted lazily through the air. The world seemed to move at a slower rhythm here, as though the city itself was caught between history and eternity. Among the hushed whispers of fountains and the soft ringing of distant church bells, the story was waiting to unfold. Amelia Bennet had not come to Florence in search of love. She had come chasing silence, or perhaps something she could not yet name. A London-born art historian in her early 30s, Amelia had always lived surrounded by the voices of others, students, colleagues, critics. Her life was built on deadlines and lectures, on manuscripts scattered across her desk, and exhibitions that demanded her precision. And yet, despite the beauty of her work, she felt an emptiness, as though her heart existed in grayscale while the world around her was painted in color. She rented a small apartment on the edge of Piazza Santo Spirito, with tall wooden shutters that opened to a view of terracotta rooftops and a market square alive with chatter. Every morning, she watched vendors set up their stalls, arranging fruit and flowers with unhurried hands, and she envied their simplicity. There was a serenity in the way life flowed here, untroubled, unmeasured. Amelia's days quickly found their rhythm. She spent hours in quiet museums, tracing the brushstrokes of forgotten masters. She walked along the Arno River at dusk, when the water mirrored the orange glow of street lamps. She filled notebooks with sketches and observations, though none of it seemed to capture what her soul was reaching for. She told herself that Florence was just a pause, a necessary interruption before she returned to the noise of her London life. Yet, deep down, she longed for something different. She longed for the kind of spark that could set her heart alight again, though she did not dare admit it. To Amelia, love had always been elusive, almost abstract. She had been admired, even pursued, but never seen, not truly, not completely. And so, she had taught herself to stop expecting it. But the city had its own plans. Florence had a way of weaving strangers' paths into delicate intersections, of aligning moments that seemed too precise to be accidental. One afternoon, as Amelia wandered through a forgotten side street, her steps carried her toward a courtyard she had never noticed before. The air was cool, shaded by the arching limbs of cypress trees, and in the center stood an ancient fountain, worn smooth by centuries of time. It was here that her story would shift, though she could not have known it then. The courtyard seemed empty, yet it pulsed with a quiet presence, as though it held a secret waiting for her to uncover. She paused at the fountain's edge, listening to the steady trickle of water, feeling as though the city itself was whispering to her. In that moment, the loneliness she had carried for years seemed to loosen its grip just slightly. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a crack of light breaking through the heavy door of her guarded heart. And as the bells of Santa Croce tolled in the distance, Amelia lingered in the courtyard, unaware that fate had already begun to draw invisible lines around her life, lines that would lead her to someone who would change everything. In the days that followed, Amelia found herself returning to that secluded courtyard again and again, as though drawn by an invisible thread. It became her refuge, a place where the weight of her thoughts softened. She would sit on the stone edge of the fountain, sketchbook in hand, attempting to capture the way light danced on the water's surface, or how the shadows of cypress branches stretched long and elegant against the worn walls. There was something timeless about that space. Unlike the crowded piazzas filled with chatter and music, the courtyard seemed to belong to another realm, untouched, patient, waiting. She could not explain why it calmed her so deeply, only that each visit left her with a quiet sense of belonging she had not felt in years. But Amelia was not the only one who had discovered its solitude. On her third visit, she noticed subtle changes that told of another presence. A fresh bouquet of wildflowers rested near the fountain, wrapped in simple brown paper. Their petals still glistened with morning dew, suggesting they had been placed there only moments before her arrival. The following day, she found a book, an old, leather-bound volume of Italian poetry, left open on a bench, its pages marked by careful underlining. She never saw anyone come or go, yet the signs were undeniable. Someone else, it seemed, sought comfort in this same hidden corner of the city. And though they remained unseen, the knowledge stirred something within her. Curiosity, anticipation, a faint quickening of the heart. Amelia began to notice little details that hinted at the presence of this mysterious visitor. A faint trace of cologne lingering in the air. A sketch left behind on a torn sheet of paper, rough but tender, capturing the curve of the fountain stone basin. Once, she thought she heard footsteps receding just as she entered, but by the time she looked around, the courtyard was still. It was strange how someone she had never met could already feel so close. She imagined who this person might be, an artist, perhaps, or a poet. Someone who sought beauty in the world, just as she did, yet chose to share it silently, through objects left behind like whispered messages. Without meaning to, Amelia began to look forward to these traces more than anything else in her day. As spring deepened into early summer, the air grew warmer, the nights longer, and the city seemed alive with festivals and music. Yet Amelia's heart belonged not to the grandeur of Florence, but to that quiet courtyard and the silent dialogue she shared with her unseen companion. Each time she discovered something new, a pressed flower, a folded page of handwritten notes, she felt a spark of recognition, as though the stranger understood parts of her that no one else had ever touched. Still, uncertainty lingered. Was this connection real, or only a story she was weaving in her mind? She wondered if the stranger thought of her at all, or if their presence was merely coincidental, their offerings left for no one in particular. But whenever doubt crept in, she returned to the fountain, and the city itself seemed to answer her with gentle reassurance. One evening, as twilight draped the sky in hues of violet and silver, Amelia paused by the fountain longer than usual. A single candle flickered there, its flames steady despite the soft breeze. Beside it lay a folded sheet of paper. She hesitated before reaching for it, her pulse quickening, her breath catching. The page contained only a few words, but they were written with a care that made her chest tighten. They were not addressed to anyone, yet she felt as though they had been meant for her all along. And in that instant, Amelia understood that the boundaries of her solitude were breaking. A presence she had never seen had already begun to change the rhythm of her heart. She did not yet know who they were, nor what role they would play in her life. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would return again tomorrow. The candle and note lingered in Amelia's mind long after she left the courtyard that night. She carried their presence with her through the narrow streets of Florence, through the soft hum of evening traffic, and even as she lay awake beneath the sloping wooden beams of her rented apartment. It was as though the city itself had whispered to her, reminding her that loneliness was not the permanent state she had believed it to be. The following morning, she rose earlier than usual, compelled by an urgency she could not quite explain. She walked through the market square as vendors arranged their produce, their voices echoing through the air, and moved swiftly toward the courtyard. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. Would the stranger have returned? Would she finally glimpse the one who had been leaving these traces of presence behind? But the courtyard, as always, was empty. The fountain gurgled softly, the cypress shadows stretched across the ground, and no figure appeared. Yet on the stone ledge beside the water, she found another offering, a sprig of lavender tied neatly with twine, resting upon a small notebook. The notebook was worn, its cover frayed, its pages filled with sketches and half-written verses. It was not abandoned carelessly. It felt intentionally placed, like an invitation. Amelia turned its pages slowly. The drawings were delicate yet precise, buildings she recognized from her own walks, arches and bridges rendered with affection. Interspersed were fragments of poetry, sometimes no more than a line or two, as if the writer had been caught between thought and hesitation. And then, tucked between the sketches, she discovered a single unfinished portrait. It was not exact, but she recognized herself, the curve of her profile, the fall of her hair. Her breath caught. Whoever this stranger was, they had seen her. Not once, not fleetingly, but with enough detail to capture her essence on paper. She felt a rush of warmth, mingled with disbelief, as though her private existence had been lifted gently into someone else's hands. For the first time in years, Amelia felt truly visible. The realization unsettled her. She lingered at the fountain, notebook pressed close, her gaze sweeping the edges of the courtyard as though yes, she knew now it was a he, might step into view. But only silence answered her waiting. In the days that followed, her life shifted into a rhythm of expectancy. Each morning, she rose with the thought of the courtyard. Each evening, she walked there again, hoping, waiting. Sometimes she found small traces left behind, a line of poetry in a folded page, a charcoal sketch of the Arno at dusk. Other times, there was nothing, only the stillness of the fountain. Yet the emptiness itself grew charged, alive with the possibility that at any moment he might appear. Florence began to change for her. Its streets no longer felt like a backdrop to her solitude, but like a living stage, preparing her for something inevitable. The bells seemed to toll in anticipation. The lights seemed to shift in recognition of her quiet longing. Every corner of the city whispered a question she was not yet brave enough to answer. What would she do when they finally met? One evening, the air thick with the scent of summer rain, Amelia lingered longer than usual. She sat with her sketchbook, tracing idle lines, listening to the water trickle. The courtyard was silent, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the cypress leaves. But then, faint, hesitant footsteps echoed from the far archway. Her hand froze. Her heart pounded. The invisible thread that had tugged at her for weeks suddenly grew taut, pulling her toward a moment she both longed for and feared. She did not turn immediately. She sat still, breath shallow, every nerve alive with the awareness that the unseen presence had finally stepped into the same space as her. The footsteps grew closer, and for the first time, Amelia realized that she was no longer alone. The courtyard, which had so often felt like hers alone, suddenly seemed transformed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Each echo against the stone pulled Amelia deeper into a current she could not resist. Her breath trembled at her chest. Her hands tightened around the edges of her sketchbook, and the silence between steps stretched unbearably thin. She turned at last. He was there, a figure framed by the archway, half-shadowed by the dimming light of evening. The stranger she had searched for without admitting it, the author of the sketches, the guardian of the fountain's secrets. For a moment, she could not move. She took in the details and fragments, as though her eyes struggled to hold the whole of him at once. He was taller than she had imagined, his posture relaxed yet edged with caution. Dark hair fell loosely across his forehead, stirred by the faint breeze, and his clothes bore the quiet disarray of someone who spent more time creating than arranging himself for the world. In his hand, she saw the notebook, the very one she had held just days before. Their eyes met. It was not dramatic, not explosive, but something far more intimate. A recognition, quiet yet absolute, as though they had been standing on opposite shores for years and now, at last, the tide had carried them together. There was no need for words. The silence spoke louder than anything either of them could have said. Amelia felt exposed, her solitude stripped bare under the weight of his gaze. Yet there was no judgment in it, no intrusion, only a softness, a reflection of her own wonder. She realized then that he too had been searching, perhaps as unknowingly as she had. The gifts, the sketches, the candle, they had not been random acts, but extensions of a heart that longed for connection. He stepped closer, unhurried, as though afraid to break the fragile spell that bound the moment. The air between them shifted, thick with the scent of rain-soaked stone and lavender, the same lavender he had once left for her. Amelia's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a fierce, aching clarity. She had been seen, truly seen. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The noise of Florence beyond the courtyard faded. The sky above dimmed into hues of indigo, and still they stood there, bound in silence, as though the universe itself had bent its laws to orchestrate this meeting. She did not know his name. She did not know his story. But none of that mattered in this instant. What mattered was the undeniable truth that she was no longer alone in her solitude. The fountain gurgled softly beside them, an ancient witness to the moment. And as the last light of day slipped away, Amelia realized that something within her had already shifted beyond return. The journey she had thought would be hers alone was no longer hers to carry. After that evening, the courtyard no longer belonged to solitude alone. Amelia found herself returning, not to be alone, but to share silence. He was there, always waiting as though time itself bent to ensure their paths crossed. They did not speak, not yet, but words felt unnecessary, almost clumsy against the eloquence of glances, gestures, and the quiet presence of two souls learning the shape of each other. Some afternoons, he would sketch while she read. The scratch of his pencil across paper blended with the soft rustle of pages, the two sounds weaving a melody that filled the air more richly than conversation ever could. Other days, she would bring her own notebook, sketching clumsy outlines of the fountain, while he watched with a patience that felt like encouragement. It was in the smallest details that intimacy took root. The way he would set his notebook a little closer so she could glimpse what he was creating. The way she would leave a flower pressed between pages of her book and find it later, carefully tucked into his sketches. Their language was subtle, a secret dialect of shared silence, exchanged objects and lingering touches of presence. Evenings carried a different magic. When the courtyard glowed under lantern light, their shadows would stretch across the stone, nearly touching. Sometimes, as the fountain whispered, their hands would rest on the same edge of the marble basin, so close that the air itself seemed to hum between their fingertips. She never pulled away. Neither did he. Florence bustled on beyond the walls, its streets alive with noise and color. But in the courtyard, time softened. Days bled into nights, nights into mornings, until Amelia could no longer recall when her solitude had last felt complete. What unsettled her was not fear of his presence, but the weight of inevitability. This bond had not asked for her permission. It had unfolded as naturally as the ivy on the walls. She felt both comforted and undone, as though a mirror she had avoided all her life now reflected her truth back at her. And yet, somewhere deep within, a question stirred. Was this fragile connection a gift meant to last, or a fleeting miracle the city had lent her? The answer lingered, unspoken, suspended in the delicate silence between them. The first storm of autumn broke over Florence one evening, sudden and fierce. The courtyard, once a sanctuary, shivered beneath the weight of rain, its stones slick and dark, the fountain overflowing with restless ripples. Amelia arrived soaked, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, heart unsettled by the thought that he might not come. But he was there, waiting. For the first time, she saw hesitation in his eyes, as if the storm had unsettled not only the city, but also the fragile world they had built between them. He held his notebook tightly, knuckles pale, as though it carried truths too heavy to be spoken aloud. When their eyes met, she felt the weight of what they had left unsaid. The days of shared silence, of gestures and fleeting touches, it had been enough until now. But beneath the storm's roar, silence no longer protected them. It threatened to undo them. He stepped forward, close enough that the rain on his hair brushed against her face. His notebook trembled in his hand. Slowly, he opened it, revealing page after page, sketches of her. Her face by the fountain, her profile bent over her book, her hands resting on stone, every detail captured with devotion, as though she had been his world long before she realized he was becoming hers. Amelia's breath caught. She reached for the pages with trembling fingers, tracing the lines that proved what words never had. He had seen her, not just her solitude, but her essence, her stillness, her hidden ache, her quiet strength. In that moment, the storm no longer mattered. The world outside the courtyard no longer mattered. She let the sketchbook fall closed, lifted her gaze, and simply let the truth unfold in the smallest, most undeniable gesture. Her hand found his. No hesitation, no retreat. Their fingers intertwined, warm despite the cold rain, and the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was whole. For the first time, Amelia smiled without reserve, her solitude dissolving into something greater. And though no words were spoken, both knew that they had arrived at the beginning of something neither time nor distance could unmake. The storm raged on, but in the heart of Florence, beneath the whispering fountain, two souls found shelter in each other.